My friends, welcome tonight. It is Wednesday, January 27th, 2021, and my name is Glenn Rawson. Welcome to our devotional. Thank you for joining me. And again, if you haven't taken the time to like the Facebook page that you're watching this on, it would really help me if you did, and it would help you by you be getting notifications of when these devotionals will happen. I find that on my Facebook page, the Glenn Rawson Stories Facebook page, that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of people that we've invited to like the page, but they haven't done it yet. So either to like it or to follow it would be a great help to us. I invite you tonight, as we begin the fireside, that you would have a prayer in your heart, a prayer for me and a prayer for all those of you that are watching. So without anything further, let me jump in. And yes, I will be talking more about the crows. It has been an interesting adventure with crows for the last 3 days, but that'll be later on in the broadcast. First of all, let me begin with this. Bad things happen to good people. Things are unfair, unjust. It's just a fact of life, and I'm sorry, I'm not pessimistic, but it's unavoidable. Bad things happen to good people. However, the Savior is just and He is merciful. And I don't know if I have the ability to express this, but He has the ability now and in eternity and the power to make all things right and just. Or said another way, He will, with our faith in Him, turn all of our terrible tragedies into great blessings. It says in the scriptures, search diligently, pray always, and be believing, and all things shall work together for your good, if ye walk uprightly and remember the covenant wherewith you've covenanted one with another. That's Doctrine and Covenants, section 90, verse 24. So with that, let me share a story with you, which was given to me just this morning. The year was 1958. James Belk tells the story of Epifanio, a large Hispanic farm worker who came to work for him. Epi was a good worker, but he could neither read nor write. He had 2 sons, ages 9 and 10, who didn't like school. They were nice, well-mannered children, but they took every opportunity to skip school. Their father had no education, and he was doing well enough, they reasoned. Why go to school? When Epi came to work for James, he had a nice car. It was a 1956 Chevrolet Coupe that he had bought on credit. Epi made his payments faithfully, even if he occasionally had to get an advance on his pay to make the payment. Every Saturday, the boys would wash and shine the car so that they could go to town. Then, James said, there came a time when the car disappeared for a couple weeks. Epi said it was so that the man who financed it could renew the insurance. Well, that made no sense to James. That seemed kind of unusual. Well, when they went to pick up the car, the dealer said that Epifanio was late on his last payment and that the car was being repossessed. Evidently, the dealer had put a large balloon payment on the note that was due and payable at the end of the year, but he never told Epifanio. It was all there in writing, but Epi couldn't read. Well, James offered to pay the note on the car, but the man refused. The reason was that Epi's brother had bought a car from the same man and then trashed it and refused to pay for it. He was now taking it out on Epi. The dealer said if they would pay him for what was owed on the other car, Epi could have his car back. Well, in short and in the long run, Epi lost the car. James took him to another dealer that he knew that was more reputable, and they managed to get him a car. All was well, James said, except for the bad taste in our mouths from being cheated. About 6 weeks later, Eppie came to James with the boys' report cards from school. They had gone, I'm quoting James now. Got to move the mic here just a little bit. They had gone, James said, from scattered attendance to perfect attendance, from C's and D's to A's and B's in all their grades. James said, I asked him, why the change? And his reply was, they said, nobody was going to cheat them out of a car. End of quote. James said it brought tears to my eyes. The point was made even though it cost Eppie a very nice car. And then James concludes, God has strange ways to make a point sometimes. Well, several years went by and Eppie came by for a visit. The boys were now in high school and the oldest was about to graduate. They were still making good grades and Epifanio beamed like a 300-watt bulb when he talked about his boys. End of quote. God has a way of working in the details to turn tragedies to triumphs, hardship, pain, suffering, depression, and discouragement. All these things shall work together for our good if we walk uprightly. So don't be despairing in these difficult times. If you keep the faith, somehow you will come out the other end of this tougher, stronger, better, wiser, more perfect. Next story. I wonder sometimes if we realize just how much animosity the gold plates and the Book of Mormon generated against Joseph Smith and his family. I mean, we're in that part of the curriculum with Come, Follow Me, where we're talking about church history. But I don't know if we really realize just how much the Book of Mormon changed the life of Joseph Smith and his family. If opposition is any measure against the potential for good, then the Book of Mormon, just on that fact alone, was destined to change the world. And all that heat and hate was aimed not just at Joseph, but also at his family. They lost their reputation, their standing in the community, and their farm in a large measure because of that book. And this story. During the printing process, Oliver Cowdery happened to overhear a group of Palmyra residents plotting and scheming against the Book of Mormon. Their plan was to snatch the manuscript away from Mother Smith and burn it. Accordingly, they came to the house and asked her to read the manuscript to them. The following is Mother Smith's account of those events. Quote, Mrs. Smith, we hear that you have a gold Bible. We've come to see if you'll be so kind as to show it to us. No, gentlemen, said Lucy. We have no gold Bible, but we have a translation of some gold plates which have been brought forth for the purpose of making known to the world the plainness of the gospel and also to give a history of the people which formerly inhabited this continent. Lucy said, I then proceeded to relate the substance of what is contained in the Book of Mormon, dwelling particularly upon the principles of religion therein contained. I endeavored, she said, to show them the similarity between these principles and the simplicity of the gospel taught by Jesus Christ in the New Testament. Notwithstanding all this, said Lucy, the different denominations are very much opposed to us. The Universalists are alarmed lest their religion should suffer loss. The Presbyterians tremble for their salaries. The Methodists also come and they rage, for they worship a God without body or parts, and they know that our faith comes in contact with this principle. After hearing me through, Lucy said, the gentleman then said, Can we see the manuscript then? No, sir, replied Lucy, you cannot see it. I have told you what it contains, and that must suffice. He made no reply to this, but said, "Mrs. Smith, you and the most of your children have belonged to our church for some length of time, and we respect you very highly. You say a good deal about the Book of Mormon, which your son has found, and you believe much of what he tells you, yet we cannot bear the thoughts of losing you, and they do wish, I wish, that if you do believe those things, you would not say anything more upon the subject. I do wish you would not." End of quote. To which Lucy replied, "Deacon Beckwith, if you should stick my flesh full of faggots and even burn me at the stake, I would declare, as long as God should give me breath, that Joseph has got that record and that I know it to be true." At this, he observed to his companions, "You see, it is of no use to say anything more to her, for we cannot change her mind." Then turning to Sister Smith, he said, "Mrs. Smith, I see that it is not possible to persuade you out of your belief. Therefore, I deem it unnecessary to say anything more upon the subject." "No, sir," said Lucy, "it is not worth your while." He then, Lucy said, bade me farewell and went out to see Hiram, when the following conversation took place between them. Deacon Beckwith said, "Mr. Smith, do you not think that you may be deceived about that record which your brother pretends to have found?" Hiram replied, "No, sir, I do not." Deacon Beckwith said, "Well now, Mr. Smith, if you find that you are deceived and that he has not got that record, will you confess the fact to me?" Hiram replied, "Will you, Deacon Beckwith, take one of the books when they are printed and read it, asking God to give you an evidence that you may know whether it is true?" To which Deacon Beckwith replied, "I think it beneath me to take so much trouble. However, if you will promise me that you will confess to me that Joseph never had the plates, I will ask for a witness whether the book is true." Hiram said, "I will tell you what I will do, Mr. Beckwith. If you do get a testimony from God that the book is not true, I will confess to you that it is not true." End of quote. Upon this they parted, and the deacon next went to Samuel Harrison Smith. Samuel didn't mince words. He simply quoted Isaiah, which says, quote, "All ye beasts of the field, come to devour. Yea, all ye beasts in the forest. His watchmen are blind. They are all ignorant. They are all dumb dogs. They cannot bark, sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. Yea, they are greedy dogs which can never have enough, and they are the shepherds that cannot understand. They all look to their own way, every one for his gain from his quarter." End of quote. Here, Samuel ended the quotation, and the three gentlemen left without ceremony. That comes from Lucy Mack Smith's History of Joseph Smith, pages 162 and 163. The end result of that, Lucy and all of her family were excommunicated from the church that they had been attending. Now, this next story I have promised to share, but it comes with a caveat. I need you to understand this and don't misunderstand where I'm going. What the Lord may command and require of one person may not be expected or probably is not required of all men. Some commandments are individual. After all, consider this. None of us have been asked or commanded to offer up our sons as a blood sacrifice on Mount Moriah. But when those individual commands come and we are obedient, well then great blessings follow. Joseph Lee Robinson was baptized August 1836. In 1841, he and his family moved to Nauvoo. Joseph became acquainted with the prophet Joseph Smith, and he bore this witness of the prophet. Quote, We have long since believed and verily know that Joseph Smith was a true and humble prophet of God. But now our eyes do see him, and our ears hear his voice, which is like the voice of the mighty thunders of heaven. Yet his language is meek and instructive, edifying much. That there is a power and majesty that attends his words and preaching that we never beheld in any man before. For he is a mighty prophet, a holy man of God. He truly had been educated in the things pertaining to the kingdom of God and was highly charged with the Holy Ghost, which was a constant companion. End of quote. Well, in 1845, Joseph Lee Robinson and Maria had another child, a girl that Joseph described as a beautiful daughter, an intelligent child. End of quote. They named her Mary Elizabeth. But the little one was afflicted with some kinds of fits or seizures that no one could cure. She was doctored, prayed for, and even administered to, but all to no lasting effect. Finally, they took her to the venerable patriarch John Smith, who, after he administered to her, he looked at the child and said, "There is a very intelligent spirit in that tabernacle, which the destroyer seeketh to destroy such as they, so that they cannot remain on the earth." End of quote. Upon hearing that, Joseph and Maria remembered something the prophet Joseph had taught. Quote, Joseph had said that inasmuch as a member of the family was sick, if the heads of that family should fast 3 days, they would get better. End of quote. Knowing that Joseph was a true prophet of God and believing that this pertained to them, they determined to go ahead. In his autobiography, Joseph Lee Robinson says, quote, "My wife proposed it. She wanted to fast, and I certainly would try. She said she would do anything she could and still live to help this child. So we set about it with a will. We ate our dinner as usual, but when night came, we ate no supper, and morning came, and we ate no breakfast. She did her housework, and I went to the wagon shop and did my work as usual. This being the winter before we left Nauvoo. Our ward had organized a company to build wagons and to make preparations to leave in the spring. I felt obliged to work, whether sick or well, eating or fasting. And at this time, he said, I was severely afflicted with rheumatism. So I had this to fast and pray for also. The first day was the hardest for me. The second day came with no eating but plenty of work. The third day came and I went to work as usual. I suggested to my wife that inasmuch as she was nursing the baby, she sip a little moist crust occasionally. But neither of us ate a mouthful of anything for the 3-day fast. Noon came on the third day, and we ate not a bite of dinner. That evening, we felt satisfied that our 3-day fast was completed, so we ate supper. And yet, there was no change in our child, and I still had my pains. We retired to our bed after saying our prayers as usual. As the Lord liveth, said Joseph Lee Robinson, these fits on our child stopped, and she had no more of them while we lived in Nauvoo. And my pains stopped. My lameness went entirely away. We acknowledged the great favor and blessings from our God. Joseph and Maria came on to Utah in the wagons that Joseph helped build. They settled eventually in Farmington, Utah, and both were laid to rest there. And as for the lovely child, Mary Elizabeth, she is one of those blessed souls buried at winter quarters on the journey west, as the family believed, an innocent martyr to the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, to the faith. Now, this next story, I love this story. Of the many missionary stories that I've been studying, researching, and writing over the last little while, this one is one of those that just gives me chills. It's typical of the new stories that will be coming out in our book titled Stories for Missionaries. As to the subject of the man in the book, I stand in awe of this man and his wife and their tremendous faith. This story reminds me that if obedience is the first law of heaven, and it is, then surely sacrifice must be the second. Because anytime we set out to obey, we must sacrifice our will and wants to let God prevail in our lives. The story is titled, I Am Ready. Curtis and Rebecca Bolton arrived in the Salt Lake Valley October the 8th, 1848. That first winter was difficult. Curtis taught classes in French, but as money was scarce, he received nothing for his efforts. His family survived that first winter in the valley, living on herbs that they could forage off the land. Can you imagine? Curtis said, "Though I managed that my beloved family should have a little bread every day, almost none can judge my anguish but those who have been similarly situated. I shall never forget," he said, "the half bushel of new wheat lent me by Brother Busby, which I had ground and carried into my family who were waiting for it for breakfast." End of quote. Curtis soon learned that the lot he had drawn to establish his farm was an old alkali lake bed. All the precious seed he'd sown in the ground was lost, and what little did come up was taken by a heavy frost. So, President Brigham Young appointed Curtis a new lot up closer to himself. Curtis wrote this in his diary. Thus, on the first day of October, 1849, I found I had worked all the spring, summer, and fall and had not earned $1. I had devoted my time to my land, living 6 weeks on greens, and here at the commencement of winter, I found myself without a house or materials to build one, without provisions and not much clothing, very much disheartened. I moved my family up on my new lot. Then, now I tell you all of that as critical background for what occurs next. Just a week later, Curtis and Rebecca went to meeting. They went to church. Curtis described what happened as they walked into the meeting. Quote, "On entering the door, President John Young, the president of the 70s, beckoned to me to come up on the stand as he frequently did. When I took my seat by his side between him and Brother Reynolds Cahoon, his first counselor, he asked me how I liked my appointment. Well, I answered it depended on what it was. He and Brother Cahoon were astonished. I had not heard, and after much questioning, told me I was appointed to go on a mission to France. This intelligence," Curtis said, "gave me such exceeding joy that I almost danced with joy. I next inquired who was to go with me, and they replied, Elder John Taylor of the Quorum of the 12. I then inquired when we were to leave. They answered, next Thursday. Well, I said, I'm ready. On the way home, Curtis opened the matter to his wife, Rebecca, quoting, "At first flush, she thought it hard that I should have to leave her in so destitute a situation as she then was. But a few minutes after, Rebecca burst into tears and said, "Go in the name of Israel's God and prosper, and I will take care of myself." Curtis would not complete his service to the Lord and the French people until October 1853, 4 years plus later. My dear friends, if we have ever wanted to know what it means to be a consecrated saint, this is it. I stand in awe of Curtis and Rebecca Bolton, of their faith, of their courage, of their sacrifice, of their willingness to serve. That's the kind of person I want to be. All right, let me stop for just a second. A couple of things I wanted to tell you on behalf of History of the Saints. This new book will go on sale starting on Monday, this next week. This is the new book, the second volume of the Witnesses of Miracles and Mercies, 1838 to 1879. It goes on sale on the website, historyofthesaints.org, and the sale will open up on Monday, and it will be distributed just as soon as we get them. That will be the two matched volumes now, 1737 to 1837, 1838 to 1879. Great stories of that kind, of miracles, mercies, and those who saw it for themselves. The other thing I wanted to tell you on behalf of History of the Saints, we learned just today that our television show, History of the Saints, that's on KSL, has outstanding ratings. In fact, about 3 times what we thought they were. It's doing really, really well on KSL. Now, for those of you in Utah, please watch it. It comes on Sunday mornings right after music and the spoken word when it's not preempted by sports. But for those of you that are not in the KSL viewing area, that's the DVDs. You can get those DVDs. All 7 seasons of History of the Saints are available at historyofthesaints.org. You can watch this popular television show in the comfort of your own home at your own convenience. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about that. Now, to all those of you who have purchased these books, whether from Glenn Rawson Stories or from History of the Saints, thank you. Again, I can't say this enough. Thank you. I wasn't planning to tell you this, but most of you know that I generally make my living by traveling around the world with Fun for Less tours. Well, I haven't been on a tour since the end of 2019, and I talked with Jim today, and it looks like every tour I've got now is canceled until July. When all of this went down, I said to myself, well, I guess I'll just go climb back in the seat of a truck and go back to doing what I know to make a living. But because of you, because of the books you purchased and these VIP memberships that you have funded this research, kept us alive and kept me running, and I don't have to go out and drive a truck to make a living. I probably shouldn't tell you that, but I felt like I just wanted to say thank you, and I didn't know how else to do it other than being just really upfront. So those of you that are VIPs and those of you that are buying the books, thank you. You're making this man's dreams come true. Moving on. You ever heard this? Whate'er thou art, act well thy part. Some of us old-timers remember that phrase and where it came from. When I was a missionary at the MTC in Provo, there was a replica of that engraved stone first seen by President David O. McKay in Scotland while on his mission. I can't tell you how many times I stopped and stared at that and pondered it. Many times since then, I've thought of that phrase. Every time I've been asked to bloom where I was planted and do my best with what I had. Even now, with the pandemic cutting off my wanderings all over the world, I stay home and do the best I can and act well my part to the best of my ability. And you're doing the same. Isn't that what life is all about? This next story is a classic in that regard. Again, remember, whate'er thou art, act well thy part. What a true and profound statement. One morning, as I was fixing breakfast, this is when we lived in Idaho, the garbage truck started down our street. I remembered that our little family dumpster was full and that I had forgotten to put it out. Well, I asked my son, Jed, to hurry and get it to the curb. Now, at that time, Jed was just a little bub. He was not very big, and that dumpster probably outweighed him. Well, in his frantic efforts to beat the truck, he tipped the can over, spilling family garbage everywhere. A few minutes later, I came to the window to see if he'd made it and saw the disgusting mess all over the driveway and the street. It was then that I noticed, with some interest, that the garbage truck was stopped in front of my house, idling. I went out to investigate and was surprised to discover the driver of the garbage truck had climbed out of his truck and was helping my son clean up the mess. As I approached, I fully expected this man to be less than pleased at having his busy schedule delayed and having to pick up by hand my smelly garbage. However, with garbage in his hands, he smiled warmly and greeted me cheerfully. After the exchange of a few pleasantries, he climbed back in his truck, emptied my dumpster, and drove off with a smile and a wave. Ever after that, when I saw that man driving that garbage truck, and he was an older fellow, he was always sporting the same smile and with a cheerful countenance, and more often than not, he would wave to me. I found myself going out of my way to wave to him and even to place my dumpster where it would be the easiest for him to pick it up. I have to tell you without any reservations, in all my years, I never met a man driving a garbage truck who seemed to love life more, who was more cheerful and impressed me more at his daily walk. Now, maybe life hasn't handed you and me the most favorable set of circumstances right now. But does that mean that we can't love life or be of good cheer? No. If we're to bloom where we're planted, and I assure you we are, may it be as a beautiful flower, not a stinky, smelly weed on the wind. I conclude where I began. Whate'er thou art this year and in this pandemic, act well thy part. Continuing on. I don't want to bring up a negative subject, so I'll pass it quickly. But politics has been at the top of the news for the last few months, and it has left many people disillusioned, angry, frustrated. But I wonder if we remember that no matter who's in power, God is at the helm, even with the destiny of men and nations who care nothing for him. No one serves in any office unless he wills it. You know that. Nations survive as he wills it. Sooner or later, we will all come to know that God governs in the affairs of men, and all will be accountable to him for their acts in relation to their offices in government. Moreover, it is not the President of the United States who has the greatest power in the world. It is the prophets of the living God. Consider this story. Stephen A. Douglas, that name should sound familiar, was born April 23, 1813, in Brandon, Vermont. He was an aspiring young man and quickly climbed through the ranks from one station to another. Even his mother said he was a genius by the age of 3. He was dubbed the Little Giant. Though standing only 5 feet 4 inches tall, he had a commanding presence. In 1839, Douglas was a resident of Quincy, Illinois. He was there and saw the Latter-day Saints driven from the state of Missouri under the authority of the infamous extermination order of Governor Lilburn Boggs. Stephen A. Douglas saw an opportunity and lobbied the Illinois legislature to grant a generous charter that would establish the city of Nauvoo for the Latter-day Saint refugees. After that, Douglas got himself appointed to the Illinois Supreme Court. It was in January 1843, in that capacity of a circuit judge and a Supreme Court judge in Springfield, that Stephen A. Douglas judged the extradition case against Joseph Smith in the state of Missouri. Douglas ruled the writ of extradition as invalid, thus setting Joseph Smith free and putting an end for a time to the state of Missouri's efforts to extradite Joseph. Joseph Smith was profoundly grateful and referred to Douglas as, quote, a master spirit, and his friends are our friends, end of quote. Then this, May the 18th, 1843, in Carthage, Illinois, at the home of Sheriff Jacob Backenstoss, Joseph Smith, Stephen Douglas, and a number of others were hosted for dinner. During the evening, Douglas asked the prophet Joseph about the saints' persecutions at the hands of the Missourians. The prophet's recounting of events lasted some 3 hours of that evening and included his unjust treatment by United States President Martin Van Buren. During it all, Douglas listened attentively and seemed genuinely empathetic. Then the prophet Joseph Smith declared the following to Douglas, quote, I prophesy in the name of the Lord God of Israel that unless the United States redress the wrongs committed upon the saints in the state of Missouri and punish the crimes committed by her officers, that in a few years the government will be utterly overthrown and wasted. There will be not so much left as a potsherd for their wickedness in permitting the murder of men, women, and children, and the wholesale plunder and extermination of thousands of her citizens to go unpunished, thereby perpetrating a foul and corroding blot upon the fair fame of this great republic, the very thought of which would have caused the high-minded and patriotic framers of the Constitution of the United States to hide their faces with shame. And then Joseph added, Judge, you will aspire to the presidency of the United States. And if you ever turn your hand against me or the Latter-day Saints, you will feel the weight of the hand of the Almighty upon you, and you will live to see and know that I have testified the truth to you. For the conversation of this day will stick to you through life. End of quote. Can you imagine? Well, the two men parted ways, as far as I know, never saw each other again. William Clayton was there that night and recorded the prophecy as he remembered it. Orson Hyde was also there and also a witness. Of course, the prophet Joseph was killed about a year later. On September the 24th, 1856, that prophecy was published in the Deseret News in Salt Lake City. In February 1859, it was again published, this time in England in the Millennial Star. So it was published twice before its fulfillment. Now turn to the year 1857. The ire of the nation, the United States, was kindled against the Mormons in Utah. What to do about the Mormon problem was a hot topic of the day for politicians and the like. Stephen A. Douglas was now, in 1857, a United States Senator. He was invited to give a speech in the old Capitol building in Springfield, Illinois, to the Illinois House of Representatives. He turned his attention to the topic of Brigham Young and the Mormons in Utah. When he came to recommending a solution to the problem, Douglas went on record as saying, quote, "I think the duty of the president," meaning the President of the United States, "is to remove Brigham Young and all his followers from office and to fill their places with bold, able, and true men, and to cause a thorough and searching investigation into all the crimes and enormities that are alleged to be perpetrated in that territory daily, and to use all the military force necessary to protect the officers in the discharge of their duties and to enforce the laws of the land. When the authentic evidence shall arrive, if it shall establish the facts that believe to exist, it will be the duty of Congress to apply the knife and cut out this loathsome and disgusting ulcer." End of quote. Well, word of that speech spread over the nation. It reached Utah, and a scathing editorial was printed in the Deseret News, along with a reminder to readers of Joseph Smith's prophecy. Douglas, however, continued his charmed climb up the political ladder until finally he received the Democratic Party nomination for President of the United States of America. But you know what happened. When the commotion of the general election of 1860 for President of the United States was over, Lincoln won the presidency, and Douglas placed last of all candidates in the Electoral College. He who had been favored to win carried only one state, Missouri. Sometime after that, Elder Orson Hyde of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles wrote the following letter to Douglas, which was reprinted in the Deseret News. He said, "Judge Douglas, will the judge now acknowledge that Joseph Smith was a true prophet? If he will not, does he recollect a certain conversation had with Mr. Smith at the house of Sheriff Backenstoss in Carthage, Illinois, in the year 1843, in which Mr. Smith said to him, 'You will yet aspire to the presidency of the United States, but if you ever raise your hand or your voice against the Latter-day Saints, you will never be President of the United States?' Does Judge Douglas recollect that in a public speech delivered by him in the year 1857 at Springfield, Illinois, of comparing the Mormon community, then constituting the inhabitants of Utah Territory, to a, quote, loathsome ulcer in the body politic, and of recommending the knife be applied to cut it out? Among other things," Hyde continued, "the judge will doubtless recollect that I was present and heard the conversation between him and Joseph Smith at Mr. Backenstoss's residence in Carthage before alluded to. Now, Judge, what think you about Joseph Smith and Mormonism?" Deseret News, 27th of November, 1860. With the loss of the election, Douglas joined forces with Lincoln in an effort to save the Union, but soon became ill and died in a lonely hotel room in Chicago, Illinois, June 3rd, 1861. He was 48 years old. Well, as promised tonight, I close with the story of crows. last Sunday, for those of you that weren't here, last Sunday I told you the story of the mystery of the crows. For the last 3 nights, including tonight, I went back out to watch those crows. This is what I saw. This is what I learned. And you may think I'm crazy, but this is the rest of the story. You remember that I titled those remarks, "Something is Going On." Well, I'll pick you up for those of you that weren't here on Sunday. It was most unusual. I was sitting at my desk when an idea came into my mind. Go to the Salt Lake Shorelands Preserve. I jumped in my truck and I headed south and got out there just as the sun dropped below the western horizon. I arrived at the preserve wondering why I was there. I parked my truck facing west to watch the last colors of the sunset. After a few minutes, I noticed that there were a lot of crows flying directly over my head, headed west from the Wasatch Mountains out towards the lake. Then I noticed there were a lot of crows. I stepped out of my truck and looked. There were crows for as far as I could see, east and west. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them. And they just kept coming and coming. I got out my camera and filmed them. Never seen anything like it. If a flock of crows is called a murder, then this was mass murder. They flew straight towards the setting sun. Not as one big, huge flock, but they just were in a long line and kept coming. And finally, as you remember, if you were here on Sunday, the last bird came. He was just a little bitty fellow flapping behind for all he was worth. "I'm coming, Dad, wait for me." And off they went. Well, I stood there musing at this strange event. As I said on Sunday, it probably makes perfect sense to an ornithologist, but I'm not an ornithologist, and I was baffled. Had all the crows from Salt Lake City to Brigham City hit the end of their workday and were now on their long commute home to roost for the night? A crow rush hour? Or was there something else going on that was causing this? The bottom line, Sunday night, I had no idea. I determined to go back the next night and see if it happened again. This is where I pick up the story. Sure enough, same spot, same time. Right at 5:30 p.m., a lone crow flew over, headed west. I looked to the east, and here they came. Thousands of them, flying just like they had the night before. For 15 minutes, crows flew over me. I timed it. 15 minutes, crows flew over me, bound for some destination in the west. As the last crow passed, I started my truck and took off west, following them. About 3 miles later, I got close enough to their flight path that I could see them off in the distance. As I studied them through the binoculars, one huge group flew off to the west, out over the lake, and I lost sight of them. But another group seemed to be right down just above the ground, circling. Some of the birds landing, some rising. They did this for some time. Then all at once, the whole bunch of them lifted off, lined out, and started flying out to the west after the others. I saw this strange, circling, hovering pattern twice. It appeared that some of the birds would tire from the long flight and would land to rest, while the rest of the flock, the murder, tightened up and circled overhead in a tight pattern. When all were sufficiently rested, they flew off to join the others for the roosting grounds for the night. While I pondered and wondered what all of this meant, Connie Henry, thank you, Connie, found an article and sent it to me, which quoted bird expert Bridget Butler, who explained that a crow diva, I think she called herself, crows are very social birds. And at this time of the year, she explains, they often flock together by the thousands for warmth, safety, and possibly, she says, convivial conversation. As we move into the wintertime, it generally starts in November and goes through March. Crows start to roost together in very, very large numbers. And we can see, she said, hundreds up to thousands during the wintertime. Crows kind of need each other. During the summer, they're hanging out in small family groups of 2 to 8 crows. But in the wintertime, it's really, really beneficial for all these birds to flock up. And we see this in other birds as well, she says. She said the birds come together and communicate about good food sources as well as for warmth and protection. They find safety in numbers from predators like great horned owls by roosting together at night. Sticking together, she also added, is a way to find a mate. Crows are one of the birds that start mating early in the spring. So these gatherings are the way for them to pair up and find a mate. So it appears, now this is me, it appears that crows gather together in the most difficult of times in the year for warmth, strength in numbers, safety, mutual support, and social interaction. Do you see where I'm going with this? In the October 2020 General Conference, President Russell M. Nelson said of the latter-day gathering of Israel, quote, "For centuries, prophets have foretold this gathering, and it is happening right now. As an essential prelude to the second coming of the Lord, it is the most important work in the world." End of quote. When we are baptized and sealed in the temple as covenant families, whether on this side of the veil or that, we are fully gathered. And why do we gather? Why have we gathered ever since 1830? Well, for the exact same reasons the crows do. The Lord said this of the gathering to take place before the second coming. He said, and I quote, "It shall come to pass among the wicked that every man that will not take his sword against his neighbor must needs flee unto Zion for safety. And there shall be gathered unto it, Zion, out of every nation under heaven. And it shall be the only people that shall not be at war one with another. And it shall be said among the wicked, let us not go up to battle against Zion. For the inhabitants of Zion are terrible, wherefore we cannot stand." And I guess the part that touched me the most about what I observed with the crows is that when one of the young or the old would tire and land, the stronger ones appeared to come together and circle overhead, protecting the weaker ones until they were sufficiently rested and ready to go on, and then all went together. The little guy, struggling to keep up, was not left behind. Can we learn a lesson from the crows? My dear friends, I will be back on Sunday night. In the meantime, in these difficult times, I pray someone's watching out for you. I pray that you have people there who check up on you, who minister to you your needs, who care and are trying to help even though their hands may be tied. I ask the blessings of the Almighty to be with you, to lift your spirits, and to comfort you in tough times until the dark clouds lift. God bless you, and good night.